The sound of clinking silverware and polite conversation filled Patricia Walsh's immaculate dining room, but underneath the mahogany table, my hands trembled as I pressed record on my phone. What I captured that evening would destroy my marriage, expose a web of manipulation spanning 3 years, and ultimately set me free from a prison I didn't even know I was living in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You see, sometimes the people who smile the brightest at family gatherings are the ones plotting your downfall behind closed doors, and sometimes the mother-in-law who insists on weekly Sunday dinners isn't doing it out of love. She's doing it to monitor her investment and plan your exit strategy. My name is Jessica Torres, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Ryan Walsh was everything I thought I wanted in a husband: successful, charming, and devoted to his family. His mother, Patricia, seemed to adore me, always, fussing over my well-being and insisting I was the daughter she never had. But as I learned that fateful Sunday evening, some prisons are built with golden bars, and some jailers wear Chanel suits and serve homemade lasagna. The story begins 3 years earlier when I first met Ryan at a photography exhibition in downtown Phoenix. I was showcasing my latest series on urban landscapes, feeling confident and independent after building my photography business from nothing. At 28, I owned my own studio in the Arts District, had a growing client base, and felt like I was finally hitting my stride professionally. Ryan appeared beside me as I was explaining the inspiration behind one of my sunset shots to a potential buyer. "The way you capture light is extraordinary," he said, his voice smooth and genuinely appreciative. "It's like you're painting with shadows and gold." Most people who tried to impress me at these events threw around pretentious art terminology they'd Googled 5 minutes earlier, but Ryan's comment felt authentic. He had kind eyes, dark hair that was perfectly styled but not obsessively so, and a smile that reached his eyes when he looked at my work. We talked for hours that night, long after the gallery crowd had thinned. He told me about his work in corporate finance, how he managed investment portfolios for high-net-worth individuals. I shared my journey from working as a photographer's assistant to opening my own studio. He seemed genuinely interested in my career, asking thoughtful questions about my artistic process and business challenges. When he walked me to my car, he didn't immediately ask for my number. Instead, he asked if I'd be interested in photographing his company's annual gala. "It's not charity," he said quickly, sensing my hesitation. "We pay market rates, and honestly, the woman they used last year made everyone look like they were attending a funeral instead of a celebration." His self-deprecating humor won me over. That gala assignment led to dinner, which led to weekend drives through Sedona, which led to late-night conversations about our dreams and fears. Ryan was different from the men I'd dated before. He was stable where others had been flighty, supportive, where others had been competitive, and family-oriented where others had been self-absorbed. When he talked about his mother, Patricia, his voice filled with warmth and respect. She had raised him and his sister Diana alone after his father died, when Ryan was 15. She had worked multiple jobs to keep their family afloat, eventually building a successful real estate business that made her quite wealthy. "She's the strongest woman I know," he would say. "Everything I am, I owe to her." I found his devotion to his mother endearing. Too many men I'd met seemed to have complicated relationships with their families, but Ryan's love for Patricia felt pure and uncomplicated. Our first meeting came 6 months into our relationship. Ryan had been building up to it for weeks, clearly nervous about the introduction. "She can be a little intense," he warned as we drove through the winding roads of North Scottsdale toward her house. "She just wants to make sure the people in my life are good for me. It comes from love." Patricia's house was stunning. A sprawling, Mediterranean-style villa with perfectly manicured gardens and a fountain in the circular driveway. Everything about it screamed success and control. When she opened the front door, I was struck by how put together she was. Even for a casual family dinner, she wore a crisp white blouse, tailored slacks, and jewelry that caught the light just so. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant bob, and her makeup was flawless. "You must be Jessica," she said, embracing me warmly. "Ryan has told me so much about you. Come in, come in. I want to hear all about your photography business." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, and I felt my nerves beginning to settle. Dinner that first night was lovely. Patricia had prepared an elaborate meal, insisting she loved to cook for family. She asked detailed questions about my work, my family background, and my goals. When I mentioned that my parents had divorced when I was young and that my relationship with them was somewhat strained, I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Interest, perhaps, or calculation. But it passed so quickly I convinced myself I'd imagined it. "Well, you have a family here now," she said, patting my hand across the table. "Ryan's happiness is my happiness, and if you make him happy, then you make me happy too." As our relationship progressed, Sunday dinners at Patricia's became a weekly ritual. She would call every Tuesday to confirm we were coming, and if we ever had to miss, she would express such disappointment that we rarely dared skip again. The meals were always elaborate productions, with multiple courses and fine wine. Patricia would regale us with stories about her real estate deals, updates on family friends, and gentle advice about our relationship. At first, her interest in our personal life seemed natural. She would ask about our plans for the future, whether we were thinking about marriage, what kind of life we envisioned together. When Ryan proposed after a year and a half of dating, she cried with joy and immediately began planning an engagement party. She insisted on hosting it at her house, inviting what seemed like half of Phoenix's social elite. "This is your moment to shine," she told me as we planned the menu and decorations. "Ryan deserves a wife who can hold her own in any social situation." I interpreted this as encouragement, not realizing it was actually an evaluation. The engagement party was a huge success. My photography skills served me well in social situations, as I was comfortable observing and engaging with different types of people. Patricia introduced me to everyone as Ryan's brilliant fiancé, the artist, and I felt like I was being welcomed into not just a family, but a social circle I'd never imagined being part of. Wedding planning became Patricia's new obsession. She had opinions about everything, from the venue to the flowers to the guest list. While she never directly contradicted my preferences, she had a way of presenting alternatives that made my choices seem inadequate or poorly thought out. "Of course, if you prefer the rose centerpieces, that's your choice," she would say. "I just thought the orchid arrangements would photograph better for your portfolio." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "But it's your day, dear." Gradually, I found myself deferring to her judgment on most decisions. She had impeccable taste, after all, and the connections to get us better deals with vendors. The wedding itself was beautiful, held at an upscale resort in Scottsdale with 200 guests. Patricia had helped us create something far more elaborate than Ryan and I could have afforded on our own, though she never made us feel indebted. "This is what mothers do," she would say whenever I tried to thank her. "We invest in our children's happiness." After the wedding, the Sunday dinners continued, but I began to notice subtle changes in the dynamic. Patricia's questions about my business became more probing. She wanted to know about my profit margins, my biggest clients, my plans for expansion. When I mentioned considering hiring an assistant, she immediately suggested several candidates, all of whom happened to be daughters of her friends. "It's so important to surround yourself with the right people in business," she would say. "Trust is everything, and you can't be too careful about who you let into your professional circle." She also began making subtle suggestions about our living situation. Ryan and I had been renting a townhouse in Central Phoenix, close to both our workplaces. But Patricia thought we should buy something more substantial, more befitting Ryan's position and potential. "Real estate is always a good investment," she would say, "and I know the market better than anyone. I could help you find something." Perfect. When we expressed concerns about affordability, she waved them away. "We'll figure out the finances." Family helps family. Within 6 months of our wedding, we had moved into a beautiful house in an exclusive neighborhood, with Patricia co-signing the mortgage. The monthly payments were significantly higher than our previous rent, stretching our budget thin, but Patricia assured us it was a smart long-term decision. "You need to think like wealthy people if you want to become wealthy people," she would tell us. "This house is an investment in your future." The financial pressure began to affect my business decisions. I started taking on clients I might not have chosen before, simply because they paid well. Patricia noticed and began referring potential clients to me, all wealthy individuals from her social circle. While I was grateful for the business, I found myself doing more conventional portrait work and less of the artistic photography that had originally drawn me to the profession. "Art is wonderful, dear," Patricia said when I mentioned missing my creative projects, "but you have responsibilities now. Marriage changes priorities, and that's not a bad thing. It's maturity." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my world began to shrink. Sunday dinners became the anchor around which our social life revolved. Patricia would often invite other family friends, couples she thought we should know, business contacts who might be useful to Ryan's career. These gatherings were always pleasant, but I started to feel like I was performing rather than enjoying myself. My friendships outside of Patricia's circle began to fade. Kelly Thompson, my best friend since college, started commenting that I seemed different, more guarded. When she invited me to girls' nights or weekend trips, I often had to decline because of family obligations or because Ryan preferred we spend our free time together. "You're disappearing," Kelly told me one afternoon over coffee, one of the rare times I managed to see her alone. "I know marriage changes things, but you seem like you're walking on eggshells all the time." I brushed off her concerns, insisting that I was happy, and that building a strong marriage required some sacrifices. But deep down, I was beginning to feel isolated and confused about my own preferences and desires. Ryan seemed oblivious to these changes, or perhaps he thought they were natural. His career was flourishing, partly due to connections Patricia had facilitated. He was being considered for a promotion that would significantly increase his salary, and he credited much of his success to his mother's guidance and support. "She's been instrumental in everything good that's happened to us," he would say. "We're so lucky to have her in our corner." The turning point came during our second year of marriage, when I discovered I was pregnant. Ryan and I were overjoyed, but when we shared the news with Patricia, her reaction was more complex than I expected. She seemed happy, but there was an undercurrent of something else, worry, perhaps, or calculation. "How wonderful," she said, hugging us both. "Though I hope you've thought about the financial implications. Babies are expensive, and with your current obligations." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. We were already stretched thin financially, and a baby would only make things worse. Over the following weeks, Patricia began bringing up the topic of children regularly. She would share articles about the cost of raising children, mention friends who had struggled financially after having babies, and suggest that perhaps we should wait until we were more established. "There's no rush," she would say. "You're both still young, and it would be a shame to derail everything you've worked for just when Ryan's career is taking off." The miscarriage happened at 10 weeks, a devastating loss that left both Ryan and me grief-stricken. Patricia was wonderfully supportive, bringing meals, helping with household tasks, and providing emotional comfort. But I couldn't shake the feeling that mixed in with her sympathy was a sense of relief. "Maybe this was for the best," she said gently one evening as we sat in her living room. "The timing wasn't ideal, and now you can focus on getting your feet under you financially before taking on such a big responsibility." Her words stung, though I knew she meant them kindly. The loss of the pregnancy had made me realize how much I wanted to be a mother, and her practical approach to what felt like a profound personal tragedy left me feeling even more isolated. In the months that followed, I threw myself into work, taking on even more clients to stay busy and avoid dwelling on our loss. Patricia praised my work ethic, but I began to notice that she was asking more detailed questions about my business operations. She wanted to know about my contracts, my pricing structure, my business expenses. "I'm just trying to understand how we can help you be more successful," she explained when I questioned her interest. "Ryan's promotion is looking more certain, and we want to make sure your business is positioned to grow alongside his career." It was around this time that I began to notice inconsistencies in Patricia's behavior. She would make comments about other couples in their social circle, subtle criticisms about wives who were too independent or not supportive enough of their husbands' careers. She would praise women who had made smart choices by scaling back their own ambitions to focus on their families. "Marriage is about partnership," she would say, "but someone has to be willing to make sacrifices for the good of the team." I started to feel like I was being evaluated constantly, measured against some standard I didn't fully understand. My successes were acknowledged but minimized, while my struggles were magnified and analyzed. When I landed a major contract, with a luxury hotel chain to photograph their properties, Patricia's response was lukewarm. "That's nice, dear," she said, "but I hope it won't require too much travel. Ryan needs stability at home, especially with his promotion coming up." The hotel contract did require some travel, and I was excited about the creative opportunities it presented. But every time I had to leave town for a shoot, I felt guilty, as if I was somehow failing in my duties as a wife. Ryan never complained directly, but I could sense his mother's influence in his subtle comments about missing me and hoping my business wouldn't become too demanding. By the 3rd year of our marriage, I felt like a stranger in my own life. My photography business was successful by external measures, but I took little joy in the work. The house we lived in was beautiful but felt more like Patricia's second home than our own, given how much input she'd had in choosing and decorating it. Our social life revolved entirely around people Patricia approved of, and I rarely saw my old friends anymore. The Sunday dinners had become elaborate affairs, often including other couples or business associates. Patricia would hold court, directing conversations and making sure everyone felt included. I found myself observing these gatherings like a photographer, noticing the subtle dynamics and power plays happening around the table. It was during one of these observations that I first noticed something odd. Patricia would often steer conversations toward topics that seemed designed to highlight problems in other marriages. She would share stories about couples who were struggling financially, wives who were too career-focused, or marriages that had failed because of incompatible priorities. "It's so sad when people can't make it work," she would say, shaking her head with apparent sympathy. "Usually it's because they didn't have proper guidance or they ignored the warning signs." I began to pay closer attention to these comments, and a pattern emerged. Patricia seemed particularly interested in stories about wives who had become too independent, or marriages where financial stress had caused problems. She would probe for details about how these situations had developed and what had ultimately led to their dissolution. One evening, as I was helping clear dishes after dinner, I overheard Patricia talking to Ryan in the kitchen. They didn't realize I was in the adjacent dining room, and their voices carried clearly through the open doorway. "I'm just concerned about the trajectory," Patricia was saying. "Jessica's business is taking more and more of her time and attention. She's traveling, building relationships with clients you don't know, becoming more financially independent. That can change a woman's perspective on marriage." "Mom, Jessica's success is good for both of us," Ryan replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Of course it is, dear, up to a point. But independence can become selfishness very quickly. I've seen it happen to so many couples." The wife gets too comfortable with her own income, starts questioning decisions, becomes less willing to compromise. Before you know it, she's talking about needing space or wanting different things. I froze in the dining room, dishes still, in my hands. The way Patricia spoke about my success, about independence itself, was chilling. She made it sound like a disease that needed to be managed rather than something to be celebrated. "What are you suggesting?" Ryan asked. "I'm not suggesting anything dramatic," Patricia said smoothly. "I just think it might be wise to have some conversations about priorities and expectations. Make sure you're both still on the same page about what kind of marriage you want to have." That conversation stayed with me for weeks. I began to notice how Patricia would subtly undermine my confidence in business decisions, how she would redirect conversations away from my professional successes, how she would make comments about the importance of wives being present for their husbands. I also started paying attention to Ryan's behavior and realized that many of his concerns about my work, his suggestions about scaling back travel, his comments about wanting more time together, echoed things his mother had said. It was as if Patricia's voice had become a constant whisper in his ear, shaping his perceptions of our marriage. The realization that hit me like a physical blow was that Patricia wasn't just observing our marriage, she was actively managing it. Every suggestion, every piece of advice, every story about other couples was designed to guide us toward a specific outcome. But what that outcome was, I couldn't yet fathom. The pieces began falling into place when I discovered a folder on Patricia's kitchen counter during one of our Sunday visits. I had gone to the kitchen to refill my water glass when I noticed it sitting open beside her purse. The tab was labeled with my name, and curiosity got the better of me. Inside were printouts of articles about photography businesses, information about average income for freelance photographers, and what appeared to be notes about my client list and business expenses. There were also newspaper clippings about divorce settlements involving business owners and notes about asset division in community property states. My hands shook as I flipped through the papers trying to process what I was seeing. Why would Patricia have researched my business so thoroughly? And why was she collecting information about divorce proceedings? Before I could examine the folder more closely, I heard footsteps approaching the kitchen. I quickly closed the folder and moved away from the counter, but not before I noticed one more thing. A business card for a divorce attorney clipped to the inside cover. The rest of that evening passed in a blur. I participated in dinner conversation, laughed at appropriate moments, and helped clean up as usual, but my mind was racing. Patricia's behavior over the past 3 years suddenly took on a different meaning. The subtle criticisms, the financial entanglements, the isolation from my friends, the constant evaluation, it all felt like preparation for something. But preparation for what? And more importantly, was Ryan aware of whatever his mother was planning? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Ryan slept peacefully beside me. The man I had fallen in love with, the marriage I thought we were building together, suddenly felt like illusions. Had Ryan been an active participant in whatever scheme his mother was orchestrating, or was he as much a victim of her manipulation as I was? I realized that I needed to know the truth, not just about Patricia's intentions, but about the extent of Ryan's involvement. The only way to find out was to start paying closer attention to their private conversations and to document what I discovered. The following Sunday, I made a decision that would change everything. As we prepared to leave for dinner at Patricia's house, I slipped my phone into my purse and made sure the recording app was easily accessible. If Patricia and Ryan were planning something that involved my future, I was going to find out exactly what it was. Little did I know that the conversation I was about to record would reveal a conspiracy so calculated and cruel that it would shatter not just my marriage, but my faith in the people I had trusted most. As we drove through the familiar streets of Scottsdale toward Patricia's house that evening, I felt like I was approaching a crossroads. On one side lay the comfortable illusion of the life I thought I had been living. On the other side lay whatever truth was waiting to be uncovered. I chose the truth, not knowing that it would destroy everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. But as devastating as that truth would be, it would also set me free from a prison I didn't even know I was trapped in. The recording I made that night would expose a 3-year campaign designed to systematically dismantle my independence, isolate me from my support systems, and position me for a divorce that would leave me financially and emotionally devastated. But it would also reveal the strength I didn't know I possessed and launch me toward a life more authentic and fulfilling than I had ever imagined possible. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest liberations. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. And sometimes, the people who try to destroy you end up giving you the greatest gift. Of all, the motivation to become who you were always meant to be. The mahogany grandfather clock in Patricia's foyer chimed 7 o'clock as Ryan and I walked through her front door that fateful Sunday evening. The familiar scent of her signature, roast chicken, filled the air, mixed with the expensive candles she always lit for dinner parties. Everything appeared normal, yet my heart pounded against my ribs as I clutched my purse, knowing my phone was nestled inside with the recording app ready to capture whatever truth lay waiting. Patricia greeted us with her usual warmth, kissing my cheek and complimenting the new blouse I'd worn. "Jessica, that color is absolutely stunning on you," she said, her smile bright and genuine. "You always know how to present yourself beautifully." Her praise felt different now, loaded with meaning I was only beginning to understand. Diana had joined us for dinner, Ryan's younger sister who worked as a nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital. She was one of the few people in Ryan's family who had always treated me with uncomplicated kindness, never seeming to have an agenda beyond simple friendship. As we settled into the living room for our customary pre-dinner cocktails, I positioned myself strategically in the corner armchair where I could observe everyone while discreetly managing my phone. The conversation started innocuously enough. Diana shared stories from the hospital, Ryan discussed a challenging client portfolio he was managing, and Patricia updated us on her latest real estate acquisitions. I participated naturally, laughing, at appropriate moments and asking follow-up questions. But my attention was split between the social performance and the growing tension I sensed beneath the surface. About 20 minutes into our gathering, Patricia's demeanor shifted subtly. She set down her wine glass with deliberate precision and turned to Ryan with a look I'd learned to recognize over the years. The expression she wore when she was about to address something serious. "Ryan, darling, I've been thinking about our conversation from last Tuesday," she said, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when dispensing important guidance, "about the concerns we discussed regarding your marriage." My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral as I reached into my purse and quietly activated the recording function on my phone. Diana looked up from her wine with interest, clearly unaware of whatever conversation Patricia was referencing. "What concerns about marriage?" Diana asked, glancing between her mother and brother with confusion. Patricia waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing dramatic, dear. Just some observations I've shared with Ryan about certain patterns that can develop in marriages over time." She turned back to Ryan, who was nodding slowly as if receiving a pre-planned cue. "Mother and I have been discussing some things that have been troubling me," Ryan said, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "About our marriage, Jessica. About where we seem to be heading." The air in the room grew thick with tension. I felt as though I was watching a play unfold, with actors hitting their marks and delivering lines they'd rehearsed. "What kind of things?" I managed to ask, my voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. Patricia leaned forward, her expression one of carefully crafted concern. "Jessica, dear, we love you. You know that. But love sometimes means having difficult conversations about behaviors and patterns that might be harmful to a marriage." "I'm not following," I said. though part of me was beginning to understand exactly where this was leading. Your independence has become quite pronounced over the past year, Patricia continued, her tone gentle but firm. The travel for work, the long hours, the way you've been prioritizing your business over your marriage. Ryan has shared with me how lonely he's been feeling, how disconnected you two have become. I looked at Ryan, searching his face for some sign of the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who had celebrated my successes and encouraged my ambitions. Instead, I saw someone who looked uncomfortable but determined, as if he'd made a difficult decision and was committed to seeing it through. Is that how you feel, Ryan? I asked directly. That I've been prioritizing work over our marriage? He shifted in his seat, not quite meeting my eyes. I think we've grown apart, Jessica. Our priorities have become different. When we got married, I thought we wanted the same things, but now I'm not so sure. Diana looked genuinely shocked. Ryan, what are you talking about? Jessica has always seemed devoted to you, and her photography business is incredibly successful. I thought you were proud of her work. Of course I'm proud of her professional success, Ryan said quickly, glancing at his mother before continuing. But success can change people. It can make them less willing to compromise, less focused on partnership. Patricia nodded approvingly at her son's words. Diana, dear, you're not married, so you might not understand the delicate balance required to maintain a healthy partnership. When one spouse becomes too independent, too focused on their own goals, it can create an imbalance that threatens the foundation of the marriage. I felt like I was in an alternate reality where my dedication to building a career was being reframed as selfishness, where my financial contribution to our household was being portrayed as a threat to our relationship. Can you give me specific examples of how my work has damaged our marriage? I asked, fighting to keep my voice level. Ryan and Patricia exchanged a look that confirmed my growing suspicion that this entire conversation had been planned in advance. It's not about specific incidents, Ryan said. It's about a pattern of behavior. The way you make decisions about your business without consulting me. The way you've pulled back from spending time with our friends and family. What friends and family? I asked, genuinely confused. We spend every Sunday here. We attend every event Patricia organizes. And most of our social life revolves around people from your mother's circle. See, this is exactly what I mean, Patricia interjected smoothly. You're becoming defensive about perfectly reasonable concerns. Ryan is trying to have an honest conversation about the state of your marriage, and you're responding with hostility. The manipulation was so subtle, so expertly executed, that for a moment I questioned my own perception of the situation. Was I being defensive? Had I really become selfish and disconnected? But then I remembered the folder I'd seen in Patricia's kitchen, the research about my business and divorce proceedings, and I realized I was witnessing a carefully orchestrated performance. Diana, bless her heart, was having none of it. Mom, I have to say this doesn't sound like the Jessica I know. She's always been incredibly thoughtful about balancing work and family. And Ryan, you've never mentioned feeling neglected or disconnected. This is coming out of nowhere. Patricia's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at her daughter's pushback. Diana, as I said, you don't have the experience of marriage to fully understand these dynamics. Sometimes problems develop gradually, and it takes an outside perspective to recognize them. An outside perspective? Diana repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. Mom, you're talking about their marriage like it's a business deal you're analyzing. The accuracy of Diana's observation hung in the air like a challenge. Patricia recovered quickly, but not before I caught a flash of irritation in her eyes. I'm talking about it like a mother who loves her son and wants to see him happy. Ryan has confided in me about his concerns, and as his family, we have a responsibility to support him. What exactly are you supporting him to do? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Ryan looked directly at me for the first time since this conversation had begun. I think we need to consider whether we're really compatible for the long term, Jessica. Whether we want the same kind of marriage, the same kind of life. The words hit me like a physical blow, but what was worse was the rehearsed quality of his delivery. This wasn't a man struggling with genuine marital concerns. This was someone reciting lines that had been written for him. "You're talking about divorce," I said flatly. "I'm talking about being honest about where we are," Ryan replied. "About whether we can find our way back to being the team we used to be, or whether we've grown too far apart to make it work." Patricia reached over and squeezed her son's hand supportively. "It takes courage to ask these difficult questions, Ryan. Too many couples avoid these conversations until it's too late to save anything." Diana stood up abruptly, her wine glass clattering against the coffee table. "This is insane. You two are talking about Jessica like she's not even here, like she's some kind of problem to be solved rather than a person you supposedly love." "Diana, please sit down," Patricia said firmly. "This is between Ryan and Jessica." "No, it's not," Diana shot back. "You've been steering this entire conversation, Mom. Ryan barely spoke until you gave him permission. This isn't a husband expressing concerns about his marriage. This is you manipulating the situation for some reason I don't understand." I felt a surge of gratitude toward Diana, but also fear for what her honesty might cost her. Patricia's control over her family was absolute, maintained through a combination of financial leverage and emotional manipulation. Speaking out against her was dangerous territory. "Diana," Patricia's voice carried a warning tone, "you're overstepping boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. This is not your business." "Jessica is my friend," Diana replied defiantly. "She's been nothing but kind and generous to this family for 3 years. She's supported Ryan's career, contributed financially to their household, and participated in every family obligation without complaint. If Ryan has genuine concerns about their marriage, he should discuss them privately with his wife, not ambush her in your living room with a prepared script." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Patricia's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing a flash of the steel beneath her polished exterior. "I think perhaps you should leave, Diana. This conversation doesn't concern you." "Actually, I think Diana should stay," I said, finding my voice and my courage simultaneously. "Since this appears to be a family discussion about my marriage, I'd like to have someone here who might actually have my best interests at heart." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Jessica, I understand you're upset, but there's no need for dramatic accusations. Everyone in this room has your best interests at heart." "Do they?" I asked, pulling my phone from my purse and setting it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've been planning this conversation for quite some time. It sounds like you've been coaching Ryan on what to say and how to say it. It sounds like you've been building a case against me as a wife without giving me any opportunity to defend myself or even understand what I was being accused of." Ryan's face went pale. "Jessica, what are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that your mother has been manipulating our marriage from the beginning, and you've either been a willing participant or you've been too blind to see it." Patricia stood up slowly, her posture radiating authority and control. "I think this conversation has become unproductive. Jessica, you're clearly too emotional to discuss this rationally right now. Perhaps you should go home and take some time to reflect on what Ryan has shared with you." "Oh, I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Not until we finish this conversation and I understand exactly what's been going on behind my back." "There's nothing going on behind your back," Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're trying to have an honest discussion about problems in our marriage." "Problems that your mother identified and coached you to present?" I replied. Ryan, when did you first start feeling lonely in our marriage? When did you first notice that I was becoming too independent? Can you give me specific dates, specific incidents that made you feel this way? He fumbled for words, clearly unprepared for direct questions that required specific examples rather than vague generalizations. It's not about specific dates, Jessica. It's about a gradual change in the dynamic between us. A gradual change that your mother helped you recognize and articulate, I pressed. A gradual change that coincidentally requires the solution she's been researching. Patricia's composure cracked further. What are you talking about? What? Research. The folder in your kitchen last week with my name on it. The articles about photography business income. The information about divorce settlements. The business card for a divorce attorney. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, calculation, and finally a cold anger that was more honest than anything I'd seen from her in 3 years. You went through my private papers, she said, her voice low and dangerous. I saw an open folder with my name on it sitting on your kitchen counter. I think I had a right to know why you were researching my business finances and divorce proceedings. Diana gasped audibly. Mom, is that true? Have you been planning Jessica's divorce? I have been protecting my son's interests, Patricia said, her mask of maternal concern finally slipping completely away. I have been ensuring that he doesn't make decisions that will destroy his future based on temporary emotions and misguided loyalty. Protecting his interests from what? Diana demanded. From having a successful, loving wife? From having a wife who will eventually leave him when she decides she no longer needs him, Patricia snapped. From being tied to someone whose growing independence and financial success will make her see him as expendable. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Patricia had been planning our divorce not because our marriage was failing, but because she believed it inevitably would fail once I became too successful and independent. She had been orchestrating the end of our marriage as a preemptive strike against a future she had decided was inevitable. You've been sabotaging our marriage to save it from a hypothetical future problem, I said, the absurdity and cruelty of it taking my breath away. I've been preventing a worse outcome, Patricia replied coldly. I've seen it happen dozens of times. The wife becomes successful, starts making her own money, decides she doesn't need her husband anymore. She takes half of everything he's worked for and moves on to someone more exciting. I wasn't going to let that happen to Ryan. So, instead, you decided to make it happen on your timeline, under your control, Diana said, her voice filled with disgust. You decided to destroy their marriage yourself, rather than risk Jessica destroying it later. I decided to protect my son's financial future and emotional well-being, Patricia said defiantly. Ryan is a good man who deserves a wife who will prioritize their marriage over her own ambitions. If Jessica can't be that wife, then it's better to end things now while he still has time to find someone more suitable. Ryan had been sitting in stunned silence during this exchange, but finally found his voice. Mom, what are you saying? I never asked you to research divorce proceedings. I never asked you to plan the end of my marriage. Of course you didn't ask, Patricia said impatiently. You're too trusting, too romantic to see the warning signs. That's why you need guidance. That's why you need someone who loves you to make the difficult decisions you can't make yourself. The difficult decision to divorce my wife? Ryan's voice was rising with shock and anger. Without consulting me? Without giving Jessica a chance to address any concerns I might actually have? The difficult decision to end a marriage that was heading toward disaster anyway, Patricia replied. The difficult decision to cut your losses before they become catastrophic. I stared at this woman who had welcomed me into her family, who had cooked for me and advised me and claimed to love me like a daughter. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating, that I felt like I was looking at a stranger wearing Patricia's face. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Since your second year of marriage, she answered without hesitation. Since it became clear that your business was going to continue growing and that you weren't going to scale back your ambitions for the sake of your marriage. My ambitions that have contributed significantly to our household income, I pointed out. My ambitions that have helped Ryan and me afford the lifestyle you encouraged us to pursue. Money isn't everything, Jessica. A marriage requires emotional investment, not just financial contribution. You've been so focused on building your career that you've forgotten how to be a wife. According to whose definition? Diana interjected. Mom, Jessica has been the perfect wife by any reasonable standard. She's supportive, loving, financially responsible, and committed to this family. The only thing she's guilty of is being successful at something other than domestic servitude. Patricia turned on her daughter with fierce anger. Diana, you have no idea what you're talking about. You've never been married, never had to balance the competing demands of career and family. Your romantic notions about modern marriage are exactly the kind of thinking that destroys relationships. My romantic notions about treating people with basic respect and honesty? Diana shot back. My ridiculous belief that married couples should communicate directly with each other rather than having one spouse's mother orchestrate their divorce. Behind their backs? I was trying to minimize the damage, Patricia said. I was trying to help them end things amicably before resentment and bitterness set in. You were trying to control the outcome, I said. You were trying to ensure that Ryan would come out of our divorce in the best possible position, regardless of what I wanted or what was fair. Fairness is a luxury you can afford when you're not thinking about long-term consequences, Patricia replied. I was thinking about Ryan's future, about his ability to recover and move on to a more suitable relationship. More suitable according to your criteria, Diana said. More suitable meaning someone who would be financially dependent on him and socially dependent on you. Patricia's expression hardened further. More suitable meaning someone who understands that marriage is about partnership, not individual achievement. Someone who knows that a successful marriage requires sacrifice and compromise from both parties. Sacrifice and compromise from both parties, I repeated. But somehow, in your vision of my marriage, all the sacrifice and compromise was supposed to come from me. I was supposed to scale back my business, limit my travel, defer to Ryan's preferences, and accept your guidance without question. You were supposed to be a wife first and a photographer second, Patricia said bluntly. You were supposed to recognize that your primary responsibility was to your marriage, not your career. While Ryan's primary responsibility was what exactly? Diana asked. To his career? To his mother? Certainly not to supporting his wife's goals and dreams. Ryan's responsibility was to be the provider and leader in their marriage, Patricia replied. To make the decisions that would benefit their family unit as a whole. With your input and approval, of course, I said. With the guidance of someone who loves him and wants to see him succeed, Patricia confirmed without shame. The conversation continued for another hour, with each revelation more damaging than the last. Patricia had been monitoring my business communications through Ryan's access to our shared computer. She had been influencing his opinions about my work trips and client relationships. She had been planting seeds of doubt about my commitment to our marriage, while simultaneously positioning herself as the voice of reason and stability. Most devastating of all, she had been preparing Ryan emotionally for our divorce, while researching the legal and financial strategies that would protect his interests. The folder I had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. She had been building a comprehensive case for why our marriage was doomed and what steps needed to be taken to minimize Ryan's losses when it ended. When I finally left Patricia's house that evening, I took with me not just a recording that would change everything, but a complete understanding of how thoroughly I had been manipulated and betrayed. The marriage I thought I had been building was revealed to be an elaborate performance, with Patricia as the director and Ryan as her leading man. But I also left with something else, a clarity about my own worth and strength that had been obscured by years of subtle manipulation. Patricia had tried to convince me that my independence was a flaw, that my success was a threat, that my ambitions were incompatible with being a good wife. Instead, she had revealed that these qualities were exactly what made me dangerous to her plans for control. The recording would serve as evidence of the conspiracy against my marriage, but more importantly, it would serve as a reminder of who I really was beneath all the programming and gaslighting. I was Jessica Torres, a successful photographer who had built a thriving business through talent and hard work. I was a woman who had loved deeply and trusted completely, and while that trust had been betrayed, it spoke to my capacity for genuine connection, not to any flaw in my character. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Phoenix, I began planning not just my legal strategy, but my emotional recovery. Patricia had tried to dismantle my sense of self, but she had inadvertently shown me exactly who I needed to become. She had tried to make me smaller, but instead she had revealed just how much larger I could be. The recording in my phone contained more than evidence of betrayal. It contained the key to my liberation from a prison I hadn't even known I was trapped in. And tomorrow, I would begin the process of using that key to unlock a life that was entirely, authentically mine. The drive home from Patricia's house felt like traveling through a different dimension where everything looked familiar, but nothing felt real. Streetlights illuminated the same suburban neighborhoods I'd driven through hundreds of times, but now they seemed to belong to someone else's life. The woman who had entered Patricia's house that evening, believing she had a marriage worth fighting for, was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the fight wasn't to save her marriage, but to save herself. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house that Patricia had helped us choose and finance. Even in the darkness, I could see the architectural details she had pointed out as investments in our future, the landscaping she had recommended. For resale value, the upgrades she had insisted would serve us well. Every element of our supposedly shared home had been selected with an exit strategy in mind. Ryan's car wasn't in the driveway yet. He had stayed behind at his mother's house, probably for debriefing and damage control now that their carefully planned intervention had gone so spectacularly wrong. I wondered if they were strategizing about how to manage the fallout from my discovery of their scheme, or if Patricia was berating him for failing to execute their plan more smoothly. Inside, the house felt hollow and staged, like a model home designed to represent the idea of married life rather than an actual lived-in space. I walked through rooms that should have been filled with memories of our life together, but instead felt like sets from a play I had unknowingly been performing in for 3 years. The wedding photos on the mantelpiece looked like promotional materials for someone else's fairy tale. I went directly to my home office, a small room at the back of the house where I handled the administrative side of my photography business. It was the one space Patricia had shown no interest in decorating or organizing, dismissing it as Jessica's work corner, with barely concealed disdain. Now I realized it was also the one space that was entirely mine, untouched by her influence and manipulation. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop and began transcribing the recording from dinner, wanting to have a written record of exactly what had been said and by whom. As I typed Patricia's words verbatim, the calculated nature of her manipulation became even more apparent. Every phrase had been chosen for maximum impact, every accusation crafted to sound reasonable while being fundamentally unfair. The process of transcription was both therapeutic and infuriating. Therapeutic because it allowed me to process the evening's revelations methodically, understanding the full scope of what had been done to me. Infuriating because it revealed how expertly I had been gaslighted, how skillfully Patricia had planted seeds of self-doubt while positioning herself as a loving advisor concerned only with my well-being. When I finished transcribing, I had 12 pages of single-spaced text documenting a conspiracy to end my marriage for reasons that had nothing to do with actual problems between Ryan and me. Patricia's own words revealed that she had been planning our divorce, not because our marriage was failing, but because she believed it would inevitably fail once I became too successful and independent. The circular logic was breathtaking in its narcissistic assumptions. I saved multiple copies of both the audio file and the transcription, storing them in secure cloud accounts Patricia wouldn't know about and couldn't access. Then I began researching divorce attorneys in Phoenix, looking specifically for lawyers who specialized in cases involving manipulation and financial abuse. If Patricia wanted a strategic divorce, she was about to discover that I could be strategic too. It was nearly midnight when Ryan finally came home. I heard his key in the front door, followed by his cautious footsteps as he made his way through the house looking for me. He found me in my office, still at my computer, surrounded by printed pages and legal documents I had been reviewing online. "Jessica?" His voice was tentative, uncertain. "Are you okay?" I looked up at him, this man I had married with such hope and love, and felt a profound sadness that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with grief. The Ryan I had fallen in love with might never have existed, or if he had been systematically erased by his mother's influence, until only this hollow puppet remained. "Am I okay?" I repeated his question slowly. "Ryan, your mother has been planning our divorce for over a year. She's been researching my business finances and consulting with divorce attorneys. She's been coaching you to see problems in our marriage that don't actually exist. She's been manipulating both of us toward an outcome she decided was inevitable. Do you think I should be okay with that?" He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I didn't know about the research, Jessica. I didn't know she had been talking to attorneys or investigating your business. But you knew she had concerns about our marriage. You knew she thought I was becoming too independent. You knew she believed my success was a threat to our relationship." "She was worried about us," he said weakly. "She could see things that maybe we couldn't see ourselves." "What things, Ryan? Specifically, what problems did she identify in our marriage that you had never noticed or mentioned to me?" He struggled to answer, just as he had at dinner. It wasn't about specific problems. It was about patterns, about the direction we were heading. Patterns she pointed out to you, directions she predicted we were heading. "Ryan, do you have any thoughts about our marriage that didn't originate with your mother?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could see him searching for an answer that would prove his independence, his ability to think critically about our relationship without Patricia's influence. The fact that he couldn't find one spoke volumes about how thoroughly she had colonized his mind. "I love you, Jessica," he said finally. "Whatever problems we might have, whatever concerns my mother might have raised, I love you, and I want to work things out." "Do you?" I asked. "Or do you love the idea of me that your mother has convinced you is incompatible with the reality of who I am?" He looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for 3 years, your mother has been systematically reframing my strengths as weaknesses, my successes as threats, my independence as selfishness. She's been teaching you to see my business accomplishments as competition with our marriage rather than contributions to our partnership. She's been programming you to interpret my professional growth as emotional distance." "That's not true," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Ryan, when was the last time you celebrated one of my professional achievements without immediately expressing concern about how it might affect our relationship? When was the last time you encouraged me to take on a challenging project without worrying about the travel or time commitment involved?" Again, he struggled to answer. The pattern was so ingrained, so normalized, that he couldn't even recognize it as problematic. "Your mother has spent 3 years training you to see me as a problem to be managed rather than a partner to be supported," I continued. "She's been preparing you emotionally for our divorce while researching the legal strategies that would protect your interests when it happened. She's been positioning herself as the wise advisor helping you navigate the challenges of being married to an ambitious woman, when in reality she's been orchestrating the end of our marriage from the beginning. Jessica, that's not fair. My mother loves you. She's always been supportive of your career. Your mother has been supportive of my career only to the extent that it served her purposes. She was happy for me to be successful enough to contribute financially to our household, but not so successful that I might become truly independent. She encouraged my business relationships with her social circle because it gave her insight into my professional activities, but discouraged the travel and networking that would have expanded my career beyond her sphere of influence. I pulled out the transcription I had made and read him several key passages, Patricia's own words revealing her true feelings about my independence and success. Ryan listened with growing horror as his mother's manipulation was laid bare in black and white. "She really said all of that?" he asked when I finished reading. "She said it and much more. Ryan, your mother has been treating our marriage like a business venture she's been trying to liquidate before it became unprofitable. She's been managing you like an asset she needed to protect from a bad investment." We talked until nearly 3 a.m, with me walking Ryan through the evidence of his mother's manipulation, and him gradually beginning to understand the scope of what had been done to both of us. It was painful to watch him grapple with the realization that his relationship with his mother was built on control and manipulation, rather than genuine love and support. "What do we do now?" he asked as dawn began to lighten the sky outside my office window. "I don't know about we," I said honestly. "I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to protect myself legally and financially from any further manipulation. I'm going to rebuild my sense of self and my confidence in my own perceptions. I'm going to reconnect with the friends and support systems your mother systematically separated me from. But I don't know if there's a we to salvage from this wreckage." "You're talking about divorce," he said, and I could hear the echo of his mother's words in his voice. "I'm talking about the fact that I don't know who you are when you're not being influenced by your mother. I don't know if the man I fell in love with ever really existed, or if he was just a performance designed to win my trust and affection. I don't know if you're capable of seeing me clearly, or if you'll always view me through the lens of your mother's prejudices and fears." "I can change," he said desperately. "I can learn to think for myself, to see our relationship without her influence." "Maybe you can," I agreed. "But Ryan, even if you could completely free yourself from your mother's manipulation tomorrow, I'm not sure I could ever trust you again. I'm not sure I could ever feel safe being vulnerable with someone who let another person orchestrate our most intimate relationship." The conversation ended with no resolution, which felt appropriate, given that there might not be a resolution that preserved our marriage. Ryan went to bed exhausted and defeated, while I remained in my office, planning the next steps in what I now understood would be the fight of my life. Over the following days, I began the process of reclaiming my identity and my agency. I started by reaching out to Kelly Thompson, my best friend from college who I had gradually lost touch with under Patricia's subtle influence. When I called her, she answered on the second ring, her voice warm with surprise and concern. "Jessica, I was just thinking about you. I haven't heard from you in months. How are you?" The question nearly broke me. How was I? I was discovering that my marriage was built on lies, that my mother-in-law had been planning my divorce for over a year, that my husband had been coached to see me as a problem rather than a partner. I was learning that my instincts and perceptions, which I had been taught to doubt, were actually accurate. I was realizing that my independence and success, which I had been told were threats to my marriage, were actually my greatest assets. "I'm in crisis," I told Kelly honestly, "and I need help figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be the person everyone else thinks I should be." Kelly immediately invited me to stay with her while I sorted things out. She lived in a small apartment in downtown Phoenix, near the Arts District where my photography studio was located. It would mean leaving Ryan and the house we had shared, but I realized that staying would mean continuing to live in a space designed and controlled by Patricia's vision of what our life should be. I packed a suitcase with essentials and left Ryan a note explaining that I needed time and space to think clearly without the influence of his family's expectations. I didn't tell him where I was going, partly for my own protection, and partly because I needed to prove to myself that I could exist independently of his knowledge and approval. Kelly's apartment was small but filled with natural light and her own artistic touches. She was a graphic designer who worked freelance from home, so she understood the challenges and rewards of building an independent creative career. As I settled into her guest room, I felt like I was remembering how to breathe. "Tell me everything," Kelly said over coffee the morning after I arrived. So I did. I told her about Patricia's manipulation, about the planned intervention, about the research folder and the divorce attorney. I told her about the recording I had made and the transcription that revealed the scope of the conspiracy against my marriage. Kelly listened with growing outrage and disbelief. "Jessica, this is insane. This woman has been systematically isolating you and undermining your confidence for 3 years. She's been gaslighting you into believing that your strengths are weaknesses." "I know," I said. "But the scary part is how effective it was." I really started to doubt myself. I started to believe that maybe I was being selfish, maybe I was prioritizing work over marriage, maybe I was becoming someone Ryan couldn't love anymore. "That's exactly what she wanted you to believe," Kelly said firmly. "She wanted you to see yourself through her distorted lens so you would police your own behavior according to her standards." Over the following weeks, Kelly helped me begin the process of untangling Patricia's influence from my sense of self. We made lists of my actual accomplishments versus the minimized versions Patricia had trained me to present. We identified relationships I had allowed to fade because they didn't fit Patricia's vision of appropriate social connections. We explored dreams and goals I had set aside because they conflicted with her ideas about proper wifely behavior. Also began working with a therapist, Dr. Sandra Martinez, who specialized in helping people recover from emotional manipulation and gaslighting. Our sessions were both painful and liberating as I began to understand how thoroughly my reality had been shaped by Patricia's agenda. Gaslighting is particularly effective when it's done gradually and by someone who claims to love you, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our early sessions. It creates cognitive dissonance because the person undermining your reality is also someone you trust and depend on. She never said anything overtly cruel, I told her. It was always framed as concern or helpful advice. That's exactly how sophisticated manipulation works, Dr. Martinez replied. The abuser positions themselves as the expert on what's best for you, gradually training you to doubt your own instincts and defer to their judgment. Through therapy, I began to understand that Patricia's manipulation had been even more extensive than I had initially realized. She had been controlling not just my relationship with Ryan, but my relationship with myself. She had been teaching me to see my own desires and ambitions as character flaws that needed to be managed and contained. Meanwhile, I was also meeting with Tom Bradley, the divorce attorney I had retained to protect my interests. Tom was a sharp, experienced lawyer who had handled numerous cases involving financial manipulation and emotional abuse. When I shared Patricia's recording with him, his expression grew grim. "This is one of the most calculated attempts at marital manipulation I've encountered," he told me. "Your mother-in-law has essentially been running a long-term campaign to position herself advantageously for your divorce while making it appear that the marriage failed naturally." "What are my legal options?" I asked. "Several," Tom replied. "We can pursue claims related to financial manipulation, since she influenced major decisions about your living situation and expenses. We can document the emotional abuse and its impact on your earning capacity. Most importantly, we can use her own recorded statements to demonstrate that any divorce proceedings she might try to influence are based on manufactured rather than legitimate marital problems." As I worked with Tom to build my legal strategy, I also began rebuilding my professional confidence. I had allowed Patricia's subtle criticisms to chip away at my belief in my own artistic vision and business acumen. Now, working from Kelly's apartment and freed from the constant pressure to justify my career choices, I began taking on more challenging and creative projects. I reached out to contacts I had lost touch with, reconnected with professional organizations I had drifted away from, and began pursuing opportunities that would expand my artistic range. Within a month, I had booked several high-profile assignments that would have taken me away from Phoenix for extended periods. Projects I would have turned down or approached apologetically just weeks earlier, I now accepted with enthusiasm and confidence. The transformation was remarkable and rapid once I removed myself from Patricia's sphere of influence. It was like taking off a heavy coat I hadn't realized I was wearing, suddenly able to move freely and breathe deeply. My creativity flourished, my business grew, and my sense of self solidified in ways I hadn't experienced since before my marriage. Ryan called frequently during this period, pleading with me to come home and work things out. But each conversation revealed how little progress he had made in freeing himself from his mother's influence. He would start by acknowledging Patricia's manipulation, but inevitably end up defending her motives or minimizing the damage she had caused. "She was just trying to protect me," he would say. "Maybe her methods were wrong, but her intentions came from love." "Ryan, she was planning to divorce me on your behalf without your knowledge or consent," I would reply. "She was researching strategies to minimize your financial obligations and maximize your chances of finding a more suitable wife. Those aren't the actions of someone motivated by love." "But she's my mother," he would say, as if that explained everything. "She's your mother, and she used that relationship to manipulate both of us toward an outcome that served her vision of what your life should be. Being someone's mother doesn't give you the right to control their marriage." These conversations made it clear that Ryan was nowhere near ready to choose his wife over his mother, his marriage over his family of origin. He wanted me to return to a dynamic where Patricia continued to have influence over our relationship, just perhaps with slightly clearer boundaries. He couldn't understand that any continued involvement from her would be toxic to our marriage, regardless of how it was managed. Diana, on the other hand, had been profoundly affected by the revelations about her mother's behavior. She called me regularly to apologize for not recognizing the manipulation sooner and to share her own experiences of Patricia's control. "I've been thinking about my own relationships," she told me during one of our conversations, "about how Mom has always found fault with the men I've dated, how she's managed to undermine every serious relationship I've tried to build. I thought she was just protective, but now I'm wondering if she's been sabotaging my romantic life the same way she sabotaged yours." Diana's insights helped me understand that Patricia's manipulation extended far beyond my marriage. She was a woman who maintained control over her adult children by ensuring they remained emotionally and often financially dependent on her. My independence and success had threatened not just her vision of Ryan's marriage, but her entire system of family control. As the weeks passed, I began to feel like I was emerging from a fog that had obscured my vision for 3 years. The clarity was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because I was rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten existed. Terrifying because I was realizing how much of my recent life had been lived according to someone else's script. I was Jessica Torres, a talented photographer who had built a successful business through creativity and hard work. I was a woman capable of deep love and commitment, but also capable of recognizing when that love was being exploited and manipulated. I was someone who deserved a partner who celebrated her strengths rather than seeing them as threats, who supported her ambitions rather than managing them as problems. Most importantly, I was someone who had the courage to walk away from a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt like a prison from the inside. Patricia had tried to convince me that my desire for independence and success made me unsuitable for marriage. Instead, she had shown me that I was unsuitable for the kind of marriage she wanted to control. The woman who had sat in Patricia's living room that Sunday evening, confused and defensive, was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and was prepared to fight for her right to define her own life. Patricia had wanted a strategic divorce that would position Ryan advantageously while minimizing her own culpability. Instead, she was about to face a reckoning that would expose her manipulation and hold her accountable for the damage she had caused. As I prepared for the confrontation that would determine the future of my marriage and my freedom, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete confidence in my own judgment and absolute certainty about my own worth. Patricia had tried to diminish me, but instead she had forged me into someone stronger than I had ever been before. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail to Kelly's apartment where I had been staying for 6 weeks. The return address showed Patricia Walsh's elegant Scottsdale address, and my name was written in her distinctive handwriting across cream-colored stationery that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. Kelly handed it to me with raised eyebrows, recognizing the name from our many conversations about my situation. "What do you think she wants?" Kelly asked, pouring herself coffee while I stared at the unopened envelope. "Control," I replied without hesitation. "She wants to regain control of a narrative that's slipping away from her." I opened the letter carefully, as if it might contain something more dangerous than words. Patricia's message was brief, but loaded with her signature manipulation tactics. She requested a private meeting to clear up misunderstandings and discuss the future like mature adults. She suggested we meet at her house the following Sunday, the same day and location where she had orchestrated the intervention that began my awakening to her true nature. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything she had done, after being caught red-handed planning my divorce, she was positioning herself as the reasonable party seeking reconciliation. She was trying to frame our conflict as a simple misunderstanding between family members rather than a calculated campaign of emotional manipulation spanning 3 years. I showed the letter to Dr. Martinez during our session that afternoon. She read it carefully, then set it down with a knowing expression. "This is a classic attempt to reassert control after the victim has escaped the manipulative dynamic," she explained. "The abuser tries to draw the victim back into familiar territory where they feel more confident in their ability to manipulate the situation. She's choosing her house, her day, her terms," I observed. "Exactly. And notice the language she uses. Misunderstandings rather than manipulation. Mature adults implying that your response has been immature. She's already trying to reframe the conversation before it happens." "Should I go?" Dr. Martinez considered the question carefully. "That depends on what you hope to accomplish. If you're hoping for a genuine apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing, you're likely to be disappointed. If you're hoping to provide her with closure or maintain family harmony, you're prioritizing her needs over your own well-being. But if you have your own agenda, if there's something you need to say or accomplish for your own healing, then it might be worth considering." I thought about her words as I walked through downtown Phoenix after our session. The city was beautiful. In late afternoon light, with the mountains providing a dramatic backdrop to the urban landscape. This was my home, my city, my life. Patricia had tried to make me feel like a guest in my own existence, constantly seeking approval and permission for choices that should have been mine alone. That evening, I called Tom Bradley to discuss the legal implications of meeting with Patricia. He was immediately cautious. "Jessica, I understand the impulse to confront her directly, but anything you say could potentially be used against you in divorce proceedings. She might be trying to get you to make statements that could be taken out of context or used to support claims about your mental state or behavior. What if I record the conversation, just like I did at the dinner? Arizona is a one-party consent state, so you can legally record conversations you're part of without the other person's knowledge. But I'd want to be very careful about your objectives and your approach. We spent an hour discussing strategy and potential pitfalls. Tom emphasized that any meeting with Patricia should be on my terms, not hers, and that I should have clear goals and boundaries going in. He also insisted that I inform him immediately afterward about anything said or threatened during the conversation. After consulting with both Dr. Martinez and Tom, I made my decision. I would meet with Patricia, but not on her terms. Instead, I drafted my own letter, typed on plain white paper and delivered by regular mail. I proposed meeting at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop in Central Phoenix that would be public enough to prevent outbursts, but private enough for serious conversation. I set the time for Saturday afternoon, when I would be fresh and alert, rather than tired from a full week of work and therapy. Most importantly, I outlined the agenda for our meeting in writing. I stated clearly that I would be discussing the impact of her manipulation on my marriage and my well-being, that I expected honesty and accountability rather than deflection and gaslighting, and that the purpose was closure rather than reconciliation. I was not seeking to repair our relationship or find a way forward as family. I was seeking to understand her motivations and to make clear the consequences of her actions. The coffee shop I chose was called Desert Bloom, a small independent cafe in the Arts District near my photography studio. It had high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and large windows that let in natural light throughout the day. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a corner table where I could see the entrance and have privacy for conversation. I ordered a lavender latte and set up my phone to record, just as I had done at that fateful Sunday dinner. Patricia arrived, precisely on time, dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looked around the cafe with barely concealed disdain, clearly uncomfortable in a space that wasn't under her control. Her usual confidence seemed slightly shaken, but she maintained her composed exterior as she approached my table. "Jessica," she said with a tight smile, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I think this conversation is long overdue." "I agree," I replied, gesturing for her to sit, "though we may have different ideas about what needs to be discussed." She ordered a simple black coffee and spent a few moments arranging her purse and adjusting her position, clearly buying time to assess the situation and plan her approach. I waited patiently, no longer feeling the need to fill uncomfortable silences or manage her emotions. "I want you to know that I understand you're upset," she began, "and I want to address any concerns you might have about my involvement in your marriage." The immediate deflection and minimization were exactly what Dr. Martinez had predicted. Patricia was already trying to reframe serious manipulation as simple involvement, and my justified anger as being upset like a child having a tantrum. "Patricia, let's be clear about what we're discussing," I said calmly. "You spent over a year planning my divorce from your son without his knowledge or consent. You researched my business finances, consulted with divorce attorneys, and orchestrated an intervention designed to convince Ryan that our marriage was failing. This wasn't involvement. This was a calculated campaign to end my marriage on your timeline and according to your preferences." Her composure cracked slightly, a flash of anger crossing her features before she regained control. "Jessica, I understand that you might interpret my actions in the worst possible light, but my motivations were pure. I was trying to protect my son from a situation that I could see was heading toward disaster." "A disaster you manufactured," I replied. "You created problems in our marriage by constantly undermining my confidence and positioning my strengths as threats. You isolated me from my support systems while presenting yourself as a loving advisor. You coached Ryan to see normal aspects of a partnership as warning signs of impending abandonment." "I was sharing my observations and experience," she said stiffly. "As someone who has been married, who has raised children, who has seen many relationships fail, I felt I had insights that might be helpful." "Your insights were predictions designed to become self-fulfilling prophecies," I countered. You told Ryan that successful wives eventually leave their husbands, so you taught him to interpret my success as a precursor to betrayal. You convinced him that independent women can't be trusted, so you framed my independence as evidence of disloyalty. Patricia's mask of maternal concern was slipping, revealing the calculating manipulator beneath. Jessica, you're being dramatic. Marriage requires guidance and support from family. Young couples often can't see problems developing until it's too late to address them. Problems you identified and defined according to your own biases and fears, I said. Patricia, do you remember what you told Diana that night at dinner? You said that successful women inevitably decide they don't need their husbands anymore. You said independence makes women selfish and unreliable partners. Those aren't observations about my marriage specifically. Those are your beliefs about women in general. She sat back in her chair, realizing that I had been paying closer attention to her words than she had anticipated. I believe in traditional marriage values, she said carefully. I believe in partnership and mutual support rather than individual ambition. You believe in female subservience, I corrected. You believe that a woman's role is to support her husband's goals while sacrificing her own. You believe that any woman who achieves financial independence or professional success is a threat to the natural order of marriage. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Then explain why you never once celebrated my professional achievements without immediately expressing concern about their impact on my marriage. Explain why you constantly suggested that my travel and networking were signs of misplaced priorities. Explain why you researched divorce strategies for over a year while telling me how much you loved having me as a daughter-in-law. The questions hung in the air between us like accusations waiting for trial. Patricia's carefully maintained facade was crumbling as she realized that I had evidence of her manipulation and wouldn't be gaslighted into questioning my own perceptions. I was trying to prevent a worse outcome, she said finally, her voice tight with frustration. I've seen what happens when wives become too independent, too successful. They start to believe they don't need their husbands. They start looking for excitement and validation outside their marriages. I was trying to help Ryan avoid that heartbreak. By orchestrating the heartbreak yourself, I pointed out, by ending his marriage before there were any actual problems to address. There were problems, she insisted. You were pulling away from the family. You were prioritizing work over relationships. You were becoming someone Ryan couldn't relate to anymore. According to whose assessment? I asked. When did Ryan express these concerns to me directly? When did he try to address these supposed problems through honest communication with his wife? She faltered, realizing she had revealed that the problems in my marriage existed primarily in her perception rather than in Ryan's actual experience. Ryan is too kind, too trusting to confront these issues directly. He needed guidance to recognize what was happening. He needed programming to see his loving, successful wife as a threat, I said. He needed coaching to interpret normal marital dynamics as evidence of impending betrayal. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Patricia alternating between attempts to justify her actions and efforts to regain control of the narrative. She tried emotional manipulation, suggesting that I was destroying Ryan's happiness and breaking up the family. She tried logical arguments, presenting her interference as practical problem-solving. She tried guilt, reminding me of all the ways she had supported and welcomed me into their family. None of it worked. I had spent weeks in therapy understanding exactly how these manipulation tactics functioned, and I was no longer susceptible to them. More importantly, I had rediscovered my own worth and strength outside of her sphere of influence. Her opinions about my character and choices no longer had the power to make me doubt myself. The breakthrough came when I asked her directly about the folder I had discovered in her kitchen, the one containing research about my business and divorce proceedings. That was just information gathering, she said dismissively. I wanted to understand the financial implications of your career choices. For what purpose? I pressed. Why did you need to research divorce settlement strategies if you were trying to save our marriage? She tried to deflect, but I kept pushing for a specific answer. Finally, her carefully maintained control snapped completely. Because I knew it would end eventually, she said with cold fury. Because women like you always choose themselves over their families. Because I wasn't going to let you destroy my son's financial future when you inevitably decided you were too good for him. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. She had revealed her true motivations completely, stripping away all pretense of love and concern. She had orchestrated the end of my marriage not because it was failing, but because she believed it would inevitably fail, and she wanted to control the timing and terms of that failure. Women like me, I repeated slowly. You mean successful women, independent women, women who don't need your approval or permission to live their lives. I mean selfish women who put their own ambitions ahead of their families, she snapped, abandoning all pretense of maternal warmth. I mean women who threaten your ability to control your adult children, I countered. Women who might encourage their husbands to think for themselves rather than deferring to mommy's wisdom. Her face flushed with anger at the deliberate provocation. I raised Ryan to be successful and responsible. I protected him from making mistakes that would destroy his future. That's what good mothers do. Good mothers don't plan their children's divorces, I said quietly. Good mothers don't manipulate their adult children's most intimate relationships. Good mothers don't sabotage their daughters-in-law for the crime of being competent and independent. The conversation reached its climax when Patricia made one final attempt to reassert control. She offered to fix the situation if I would agree to certain conditions going forward. I could return to Ryan, and they would work on rebuilding trust. But I would need to scale back my business travel and be more present for family obligations. I would need to consult with them before making major professional decisions and prioritize their concerns about the impact on my marriage. The offer was breathtaking in its audacity. After being caught planning my divorce, after admitting that she had manipulated our marriage from the beginning, she was still trying to dictate the terms of my life going forward. She was still positioning herself as the authority figure whose approval I needed to secure. Patricia, I said, my voice steady and clear, I'm not here to negotiate the terms of your continued involvement in my life. I'm here to inform you that your involvement is over. You will have no input into my marriage, my career, or my personal decisions. You will not be researching my business, consulting attorneys about my future, or coaching Ryan about how to manage our relationship. You can't cut me out of my son's life, she said, her voice rising with panic as she realized she was losing control completely. I'm not cutting you out of Ryan's life, I replied. I'm removing myself from your sphere of influence. If Ryan chooses to maintain a relationship with you, that's his decision. But that relationship will no longer include access to information about me or input into decisions that affect my well-being. Ryan will never choose you over his family, she said with desperate certainty. Then Ryan will lose me, I said simply, because I will never again live my life according to your expectations or seek your approval for my choices. The finality of my statement seemed to hit her like a physical blow. For 3 years, she had held the power to influence my decisions through guilt, manipulation, and her control over Ryan. Now she was discovering that power had limits, and I had found the strength to step beyond them. Our meeting ended with Patricia making threats about what she would tell people about our conversation, about how she would describe my behavior to mutual friends and family members. I listened to her threats calmly, no longer caring about her ability to control how others perceived me. The people whose opinions mattered would judge me by my actions and character, not by her carefully crafted narrative. As I walked back to my car, I felt a profound sense of completion. The confrontation I had dreaded for weeks had revealed exactly what I needed to know about Patricia's character and motivations. More importantly, it had revealed my own strength and resilience. I had faced down a master manipulator and emerged with my sense of self intact. The recording I had made would serve as documentation of her admissions and threats, but more importantly, the conversation had served as my final liberation from her influence. I was no longer the confused, defensive woman who had sat in her living room 6 weeks earlier. I was Jessica Torres, a successful photographer who deserved respect and honesty in her relationships. That evening, I called Ryan to inform him about my meeting with his mother and to make clear what the conversation had revealed about her true motivations. I also made clear what it had revealed about the choices facing our marriage. She admitted to planning our divorce because she believed I would eventually leave you anyway, I told him. She admitted that her interference was based on prejudices about successful women rather than actual problems in our relationship. She offered to fix things if I agreed to scale back my career and accept her continued involvement in our marriage. Ryan listened in stunned silence as I described his mother's admissions and threats. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What does this mean for us?" he asked finally. "It means you have a choice to make," I replied. "You can choose to break free from your mother's influence and rebuild our marriage on a foundation of mutual respect and support. Or you can continue to prioritize her opinions over our partnership. But you can't have both. I will never again live under the shadow of her manipulation." "Jessica, she's my mother. I can't just cut her out of my life." "I'm not asking you to cut her out of your life. I'm asking you to set boundaries that protect our marriage from her interference. I'm asking you to choose your wife over your mother when those loyalties conflict." "What if I can't?" he asked, and the question revealed everything I needed to know about where his priorities lay. "Then you've already made your choice," I said sadly, "and I've made mine." The phone call ended with no resolution, but with complete clarity about where we stood. Ryan was still unable or unwilling to prioritize our marriage over his mother's approval. Patricia's manipulation had been so thorough, so deeply embedded in his thinking, that he couldn't conceive of a life where her opinions didn't hold supreme authority. As I prepared for bed in Kelly's guest room that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with my own decisions. I had fought for my marriage, confronted the forces that threatened it, and given Ryan every opportunity to choose our partnership over his mother's control. His inability to make that choice was disappointing but not surprising. Tomorrow, I would begin the final phase of reclaiming my life. I would file for divorce, not because my marriage had failed naturally, but because it had been systematically destroyed by manipulation and control. I would rebuild my career without apology or limitation. I would reconnect with friends and pursue dreams that I had set aside to accommodate other people's expectations. Most importantly, I would never again allow anyone to convince me that my strength was a weakness, that my success was a threat, or that my independence was incompatible with love. Patricia Walsh had tried to diminish me to fit her narrow vision of appropriate wifely behavior. Instead, she had forged me into someone who understood her own worth and was prepared to fight for her right to define her own life. The confrontation was over, but my victory was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the sunlit gallery space that would soon house my first solo exhibition, watching as workers carefully hung my latest series of photographs. The collection, titled Breaking Glass, explored themes of liberation, authenticity, and the beauty that emerges when artificial constraints are shattered. Each image captured a moment of transformation, from broken mirrors reflecting fragmented light to butterflies emerging from cocoons to desert flowers blooming through cracked concrete. The gallery owner, Marcus Rivera, stepped beside me to admire a particularly striking piece featuring a woman's silhouette walking away from a burning mansion, her shadow long and confident against the flames. "This one is extraordinary, Jessica. There's such power in the composition, such certainty in the figure's movement." "She knows where she's going," I replied, remembering the day I had staged and photographed that image. The model had been a friend who understood the story behind the series. and her posture captured exactly the feeling I wanted to convey. Not running from something, but walking toward something better. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, a surprisingly straightforward process once I presented Tom Bradley with the recordings of both Patricia's dinner intervention and our coffee shop confrontation. Patricia's own admissions about planning my divorce and her prejudices against successful women had made it impossible for her to contest my claims about manipulation and emotional abuse. Ryan had attempted reconciliation twice during the proceedings, each time promising that he could change, that he could set boundaries with his mother, that our marriage could survive if I would just give him another chance. But each conversation revealed that he still didn't understand the fundamental problem. He kept framing the issue as a conflict between two women he loved, rather than recognizing it as a systematic violation of our marriage's boundaries and my personal autonomy. The final conversation had taken place in Tom's office, with both our attorneys present. Ryan had looked genuinely broken as he signed the papers, and I felt sadness for the loss of what might have been, but I felt no regret about my decision to choose freedom over a marriage built on someone else's foundation. "I still don't understand why we can't work this out," he had said as we left the attorney's office. "Other couples survive family conflicts. Other marriages find ways to accommodate different perspectives." "Ryan," I had replied gently, "your mother didn't have a different perspective about our marriage. She had a different agenda. She wasn't trying to help us succeed as a couple. She was preparing for our failure so she could control the aftermath. There's no accommodation possible with someone whose goal is to end your marriage." He had walked away shaking his head, still unable to fully grasp that his mother's love came with strings attached that strangled rather than supported. Diana had told me later that he spent weeks in therapy trying to understand what had happened, but that Patricia's influence was so deeply embedded in his thinking that breaking free seemed almost impossible. Diana herself had made remarkable progress in recognizing and addressing her mother's control over her own life. She had moved to Denver for a new job opportunity, putting physical distance between herself and Patricia's daily influence. When she called to check on my progress with the gallery exhibition, her voice carried a lightness I had never heard before. "I met someone," she told me during one of our regular conversations. "His name is Michael, and he's completely different from the men Mom always pushed me toward. He's an elementary school teacher, makes about half what she thinks is acceptable for a potential son-in-law, and he loves that I'm independent and career-focused. We're talking about moving in together." "How does Patricia feel about that?" I asked. Diana's laugh was both bitter and liberating. "She doesn't get a vote anymore. I told her that my romantic life is off limits for her commentary and involvement. She's not speaking to me right now, but honestly, the silence is refreshing." Kelly had been invaluable during the transition period, not just as a friend providing housing and emotional support, but as a business advisor helping me rebuild my professional identity. She had connections in the art world that I had never explored while focused on the commercial photography that Patricia had deemed more appropriate for a married woman. "You were always talented enough for fine art photography," Kelly told me as we reviewed the layout for my exhibition catalog. "You just needed to believe you deserved to create art for its own sake, not just as a service to other people's visions." The exhibition opening was scheduled for the following Friday, and advance sales had exceeded everyone's expectations. Several pieces had already been purchased by collectors who had seen the preview catalog, and 3 different magazines had requested interviews about the personal story behind the work. I had been hesitant about sharing the details of my divorce and the manipulation that inspired the series, worried about privacy and potential backlash. But Dr. Martinez had encouraged me to consider the therapeutic value of telling my story, both for my own healing and for other women who might be experiencing similar situations. "Your experience with Patricia represents a very sophisticated form of emotional abuse," she had explained during one of our sessions. "Many women are living in marriages where they're being systematically undermined and controlled without recognizing Your story could help them identify the patterns and find the courage to seek help. The decision to go public with my experience had been made easier by an unexpected source of validation. Sandra Kim, the private investigator I had worked with, had referred several other women to me over the months following my divorce. Each had discovered similar patterns of interference and manipulation from in-laws who claimed to be protecting their children's marriages while actually orchestrating their destruction. One woman, Carmen, had discovered that her mother-in-law was secretly encouraging her husband to have an affair to test their marriage and provide grounds for divorce if she proved unsuitable. Another, Michelle, had learned that her father-in-law was systematically undermining her small business by spreading negative reviews and discouraging potential clients, all while expressing concern about the stress her work was putting on the family. "There's a pattern here," Sandra told me when she shared these stories. Controlling parents who can't let go of their adult children, who see marriage partners as threats to their influence rather than additions to the family. Your willingness to document and expose this behavior could help other people recognize what's happening to them. The support from these women had given me courage to use my platform as an artist to address broader themes of manipulation and liberation. The exhibition catalog included essays from several contributors, including Dr. Martinez, about recognizing and recovering from emotional abuse in family systems. Tom Bradley had also played an unexpected role in my post-divorce life. During our work together, he had mentioned that he frequently encountered cases involving family manipulation and financial abuse, but that many victims lacked the resources or evidence to protect themselves effectively. "You were lucky to have that recording," he had told me. "Most people in your situation don't have such clear documentation of the manipulation they're experiencing. They know something is wrong, but they can't prove it to themselves or others." This conversation had led to my involvement with a local, nonprofit organization that provided legal advocacy for women experiencing financial and emotional abuse. I began volunteering as a speaker at their workshops, sharing my story and encouraging other women to trust their instincts about manipulative behavior. The work was deeply fulfilling in ways that surprised me. For years, I had focused on building my photography business and supporting Ryan's career, but I had never considered how my experiences might be valuable to other people facing similar challenges. Speaking to groups of women who were struggling to understand their own situations gave me a sense of purpose that went beyond personal success. One evening, after speaking to a support group in Mesa, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "I thought I was going crazy," she said. "My husband's family keeps telling me that I'm too sensitive, that I'm imagining problems that don't exist. But everything you described is happening to me. They're isolating me from my friends, questioning every decision I make, and making me feel like I'm failing as a wife." Conversations like these reminded me why sharing my story mattered, even when it felt uncomfortable or invasive. My experience with Patricia had given me insights that could help other women recognize manipulation before it destroyed their sense of self. The photography exhibition opening arrived with surprising fanfare. The local arts community had embraced the show, partly because of the quality of the work, but also because of the powerful personal narrative behind it. The gallery was packed with collectors, artists, journalists, and supporters who had followed my journey from divorce to artistic rebirth. Marcus gave a brief introduction, explaining the genesis of the series and praising my courage in transforming personal trauma into universal art. When he invited me to speak, I looked out at the crowd and saw faces that reflected my own journey. Women who had fought for their independence, men who supported strong partners, young people trying to understand healthy relationship dynamics. This series began with a moment of devastating clarity, I told the audience. The moment I realized that someone I trusted had been systematically undermining my sense of self and my marriage for their own purposes. But what started as documentation of betrayal became exploration of liberation. Each photograph in this Series represents a step away from living according to other people's expectations and toward embracing authentic self-expression. I shared selected details about Patricia's manipulation, focusing on the patterns and tactics rather than personal grievances. I talked about the gradual erosion of confidence that comes from constant subtle criticism, the isolation that results from being systematically separated from support systems, and the confusion that arises when someone who claims to love you is actually working against your best interests. The most insidious part of sophisticated manipulation is that it makes you doubt your own perceptions, I explained. You know something feels wrong, but you can't articulate what it is. You start to question your own judgment and defer to people who claim to know better. Recovery begins when you learn to trust yourself again. The response was overwhelming. People approached me throughout the evening with their own stories of family manipulation, workplace gaslighting, and relationship control. Many expressed gratitude for the language and framework I had provided to understand their experiences. By the end of the evening, 12 of the 24 photographs in the series had sold, with several galleries expressing interest in touring the exhibition to other cities. More importantly, I had connected with a community of people who understood the value of art that addresses difficult truths about power, control, and liberation. The success of the exhibition led to unexpected opportunities. A publisher contacted me about creating a book that combined the photographs with essays about recognizing and recovering from emotional manipulation. A documentary filmmaker wanted to explore the broader phenomenon of family interference in adult relationships. 3 different universities invited me to speak about the intersection of art and social advocacy. Each opportunity reinforced my sense that Patricia's attempt to diminish and control me had actually led to the most authentic and fulfilling period of my life. Her narrow vision of appropriate wifely behavior had prevented me from exploring my full potential as an artist and advocate. Her manipulation had been intended to keep me small and manageable, but instead it had revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. On a quiet Sunday morning, exactly 1 year after the dinner where I had first recorded Patricia's manipulation, I sat in my new studio apartment reviewing the documentary filmmaker's proposal. The space was smaller than the house I had shared with Ryan, but it was entirely mine, decorated according to my aesthetic preferences and organized around my creative needs. The apartment was in a converted warehouse in the Arts District, with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and enormous windows that flooded the space with natural light. My photography equipment occupied one corner, while my living area was arranged around comfort and functionality rather than impressive appearances. I had furnished the space with pieces that brought me joy rather than status. A comfortable reading chair by the window, a dining table where I could spread out my work, shelves lined with books about art, psychology, and women's stories. Everything in the space reflected my actual preferences rather than what someone else thought would be appropriate. The phone rang as I was making notes on the documentary proposal. Diana's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with genuine pleasure at hearing from her. "Jessica, I have news," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "Michael proposed last night, and I said yes. We're planning a small ceremony in Denver with just close friends and family." "Congratulations, I'm so happy for you both. How did Patricia react to the engagement?" Diana's laugh was rueful, but not bitter. "She doesn't know yet. We're not telling her until after we're married. We don't want her interference or manipulation to taint this experience. She'll find out when we send announcements afterward." The conversation reminded me how much Diana had grown since her mother's manipulation had been exposed. She had learned to protect her happiness from Patricia's need to control and critique every aspect of her children's lives. "I wanted to ask you something," Diana continued. "Would you consider being my wedding photographer? I know it's mixing personal and professional relationships, but I can't think of anyone I'd rather have capture this day." The request touched me deeply. Diana had been one of the few people to stand up for me during Patricia's intervention, and her friendship had been crucial during my recovery. "I would be honored," I replied, "but only if you promise to let me give you the photos as a wedding gift." After we finished planning the details of her wedding photography, Diana asked about my own romantic life. It was a question I had been expecting, but hadn't been sure how to answer. The truth was that I had been on several dates over the past few months, introduced by friends who thought I was ready to explore new relationships. Each experience had been pleasant, but ultimately unsatisfying, not because the men weren't worthy, but because I was still learning how to be myself in romantic contexts without the overlay of Patricia's programming. "I'm taking it slowly," I told Diana. "I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else's definition of a good partner. I want to make sure that when I do get serious about someone, it's because we genuinely complement each other, not because I'm trying to prove something or fulfill someone else's expectations." Dr. Martinez had been encouraging about my cautious approach to dating. "You spent 3 years in a relationship where your authentic self was systematically discouraged," she had explained. "It's natural that you need time to rediscover what you actually want in a partner versus what you were taught to want." The truth was that I was enjoying my independence in ways I had never experienced before. I made decisions based on my own preferences and values rather than trying to anticipate how others would react. I pursued opportunities that excited me, rather than ones that seemed practical or appropriate. I surrounded myself with people who celebrated my successes rather than managing them as potential problems. For the first time in my adult life, I understood the difference between being alone and being lonely. I was alone in the sense that I wasn't in a romantic partnership. But I wasn't lonely because I had built a life filled with meaningful work, genuine friendships, and authentic self-expression. As the afternoon sun slanted through my studio windows, I returned to reviewing the documentary proposal. The filmmaker wanted to explore how family manipulation affects adult relationships, using my story as a starting point to examine broader patterns of control and interference. The project would require me to be even more public about my experience with Patricia, potentially exposing me to criticism and judgment from people who believed family loyalty should override individual well-being. But it would also provide a platform to reach women who might be living in situations similar to what I had experienced. I thought about the young woman who had approached me after the support group meeting, about Carmen and Michelle and the other women Sandra had connected me with, about Diana's courage in breaking free from her mother's control. My story had value not because my suffering was unique, but because my recovery was possible for others. By evening, I had made my decision. I would participate in the documentary, publish the book, and continue using my platform to address family manipulation and emotional abuse. Patricia had tried to silence my authentic voice, but instead, she had given me something important to say. That night, as I prepared for bed in my own space surrounded by my own choices, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from living authentically. Patricia Walsh had wanted to control my story, to write my marriage's ending according to her prejudices and fears. Instead, she had forced me to become the author of my own life. The recording I had made at that Sunday dinner had changed everything, but not in the way Patricia had intended. She had planned to use that evening to convince Ryan that our marriage was doomed and that divorce was the only solution. Instead, I had captured evidence of her manipulation that freed me from her influence forever. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest liberation. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted helps you discover what you actually need. And sometimes, the people who try to diminish you end up revealing just how powerful you can become when you refuse to accept their limitations. I was Jessica Torres, successful photographer, survivor, and advocate. I was a woman who had learned to trust her own instincts and value her own worth. Most importantly, I was someone who had transformed betrayal into strength and used that strength to help others find their own freedom. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I was finally free to explore. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see where my own choices would lead me. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.